Okay, these are notes for lesson 18, and we're going to be working straight out of the book today. So out of in your textbook, starting with example 18.1, we're going to write the equations. Okay, but I'll read them and then I'll show you how you write them. The number of blues, that's what that represents, was equals 4 less than, come over here and do minus 4, the sum of the whites and the greens. So it's going to be the sum of the whites and the greens. The next sentence says, also the number of greens equaled, so equals, the sum of the blues and the whites. Then it says, how many of each were there if there were twice as many blues as whites? So the number of blues is twice the number of whites. Then you're going to take these 3 equations and you're going to solve for each one of these. The number of blues, the number of whites, and the number of greens. So this one is the most simple, so take it and substitute it into both of these 2 equations. So you're going to take it and sub it in up here, right there, which you can see I did right here, and then rewrote the rest of this right over here. Okay, so I'll put 2 times the number of whites for that right there. And then just simplify that. And then I took it and I put it in the second equation, and this is what I got. So now I have, when I simplify this, I've got this equation and this one. So I got 2 new equations. So I'm going to work with these 2. So I can take this and sub it in to this one here. So take 3 times the number of whites and sub it in right here, and you get this equation. When you simplify that, you end up with the number of whites equals 2. Once you get 2, it becomes quite easy. So I can quickly sub it in right here, and 2 times 2 is 4, so I get the number of blues. And if I have 2 whites and 4 blues, then I can, to find number of greens, I could just use this one. So number of blues 4 plus number of whites 2, so I'm going to get 6. Okay, the next example, 18.2. It says there were 20 total coins. That means all the quarters and dimes and nickels, there was a total of 20 coins. So that's the number of quarters plus the number of dimes plus the number of nickels is 20. It says it totaled $1.90. You got $1.90. But this equation is talking about the quantity of coins, and this equation is talking about their value. So you're going to multiply each one of these by the value of each coin. Now you're going to want to obviously clear those decimals in a minute. It also said that there were 4 times as many nickels as quarters. So the number of nickels is 4 times the number of quarters. So if you take this and substitute it in for the number of nickels, right here. So the first thing you got to do, though, is move your decimals over 2 places. Okay, so you end up with 25, 10, 5, and 190. And then take this 4 times the number of quarters and plug it in right there. And then simplify this equation and you get this. Now I had this equation here. And what I'm showing you here is that I can also, since the number of nickels is 4 times the number of quarters, I can plug that in also. So for the number of nickels right here, I put in 4 times the number of quarters and then just added those 2 together. So I have this equation and I have this one right down here. So now this one and this one. So I have no variable in front of this one, so it's a 1. I've got a 5 here. If I multiply this one by a negative 10, then this number of nickels over here is 10 times that. If I multiply this by negative 10, I'll get negative 10 times the number of dimes. I said nickels, it's dimes. Multiply it through, and you get this. Rewrite this one, and I changed the order of it so that my like terms will line up. You eliminate that, and now you're able to solve this equation all the way down to the number of quarters. Once you get that, of course, I would recommend you go back to this one, because it's the easiest one. You get that next. And then you can use the number of quarters and nickels at 2 and 8 up here in this first equation to figure out that you're going to have 10 dimes. Okay, example number 3. It says the reds varied directly as blues squared and inversely as greens. So reds are directly as blues being squared and inversely as greens. So where I've got those circled and where they're subscripted 1, that's the first case. Then they're not going to tell you to do this, but what you need to do then is flip the fraction and write it again, but this time with subscript 2. So where you had red here and blue here, I'm doing red and blue. Where you had green on the bottom, I put green on the top. So this red and blue and green, this is red and blue and green. Notice the sub 1 and sub 2, it's like the first case and the second case. So then in the problem it says, when there are 80 reds, there are 4 blues and 2 greens. So that's going to be your first scenario. So there's 80 reds, there's 4 blues, and 2 greens. Now why do I have a square there? Because they told me to square it in the very beginning of the problem. It said then, how many reds will you have when you have 8 blues and 10 greens? So I'm going to find the number of reds I have when I have 8 blues and 10 greens. So the first one went into the sub 1, and the second one went into the sub 2. And you can see that this now becomes an easy problem to solve because it's just simply cross multiplication. Now, I didn't multiply everything out. I just said 80 times 2 times 64, and then this is 16 times 10 times r sub 2. I know I want to solve for r sub 2, so I'm going to divide by 16, and I'm going to divide by 10, both sides. Well, that made it really easy to simplify over here because 10 goes into 80 8 times, and 16 goes into 64 4 times. So that's 8 times 8, which is 64.